Welcome to Trial by Wine. We take a closer look at crimes that highlight how fascinating humans can be. Schmitty, Swanny and Clarkey visit crimes and run them through their jury of three, debating both sides of the case to agree an appropriate, if totally fictitious, sentence. Please be advised, Trial by Wine may include explicit or disturbing content and will include drunken rambling. Listener discretion is advised. All right, how are we?
Tickety-boo.
Super duper.
Any news?
What can? Oh, we were. I mean, it's not really news, but Cyndi Lauper's coming to Australia.
She is for her goodbye tour, another farewell tour.
Yeah, a John Farnham inspired farewell tour.
I was thinking Elton John, but sure. Yeah. Anyway, I suppose we should introduce ourselves. I'm Schmitty.
I'm Swanny.
And I'm Clarkey. And together we are
Trial by
Wine. And what are we drinking?
Wine. We're having a Feathertop Riesling.
Lovely. And Swanny's going to pull out some kind of sparkling water, I can tell.
I am, but it's not cost of living crisis this week.
Pellegrino?
I've had Bridge and the ladies have, so it's been San Pellegrino.
Did you win the lotto?
I know. It's like I don't want to come across as all rich and all, but you know.
Not even a second-hand
sparkling.
bottle.
And I'm about to crack it open now. I know it's a fresh one. I knew you guys would be going crazy over this when I put it
I'm
upstairs.
so jealous. Well, you need to calm down,
You're sure it's
lady.
not Soda Stream, that you just keep the bottle and top it up?
I'm not so classy that I bought a glass out to drink it. I'll just go another bottle.
Nice. Nicely done.
Keep your skills up for the weekend.
Absolutely. And what about you, Schmitty?
I'm on a mango chutney. I found
chutney.
2 in the fridge and I thought, yeah, I'll start with that. I am chilling a Pinot Gris though, but I don't know if I'll get to it, so we'll see.
Is that number one?
Pardon?
You haven't pre-gamed, that's
drink?
number one?
No, that's all I've had, and it's been while we've been talking. Yeah.
It's weird.
Okay, so I believe, Swanny, you're going to regale us with a story today.
I do have a story.
Yay.
Yes. And I'm kind of going to start with my sources. So I've got them out of the way. I've used cbsnews.com, refinery24.com, Wikipedia, Murderpedia.
Oh.
And I also listened to, I watched actually, a thing on YouTube by a woman called Emma Keddy, and it was called An Organised Killer.
Okay.
So that gives it away a little bit. But anyway, the point of this story is probably to tell you up front that we have a killer. So there's not going to be a big review in that sense. No, I don't. I'm not sure that that's the right way to sort of tell you about him, because
when you say he's an organised killer, is he organised like Murray?
Oh, the lady, the Japanese, the
one who.
Oh, yeah.
What was that called?
Marie Kondo.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
he
like
probably
so
would have been
organised that he just, has to.
He's pretty organised.
His murders spark joy.
That is exactly what you could call this episode, because it sparked joy for him. No doubt about that.
Okay.
Oh.
Absolutely. So this story was actually prompted because Schmitty had mentioned this to me and said I should possibly look into it. And I'd never heard of the person in question.
And I can't
to be honest,
ever saying this.
neither have a lot of other, you will do, and neither have a lot of other people, it would appear. He's apparently the killer that no one really knows about. So
except perhaps me, if I've mentioned it.
Yes, but of course Schmitty.
Is it Israel Keys?
It is Israel Keys, yeah.
But lots of people have heard of Israel Keys. But anyway, go on.
But apparently he's like the serial killer that lots of people haven't heard of.
How
I
weird.
haven't heard of him.
Yeah, I hadn't. And there's a little bit of information around why a lot of people hadn't heard of him, which is quite interesting.
Okay.
Oh, I can't wait.
Yes, and it's sort of like, I don't know, there's not a lot of info. There's quite a bit of information, but there's so much more information that I would like to know, the FBI would like to know.
Okay.
It's sort of like there's just enough to tell a story, and it's certainly terrifying. But there's the thing that the FBI have said, and it's true, it kind of left them with more questions than were ever answered. And there's a whole host of sort of scenarios and crimes that were committed that were they able to be attributed to him or not, they still don't know. So it is fair to say that the one thing he was good at was what he wanted to do, which was murder people. He was very good. And the idea that there was a piece on YouTube called The Organised Killer, it's because he was very organised.
Was he born for it? Was it his calling?
Well,
He
let
was
me
very
start.
organised, yes.
It's funny you should say that, because when I tell you a little bit about his childhood, I did read one author say that he kind of had a perfect upbringing for what he would end up sort of doing. It was a very challenging childhood. So let's start at the beginning. The name of today's killer, and it does turn out that he's a serial killer, is Israel Keys. And he was only born in January of 1978. And so he's not terribly old. And this is a fairly recent crime, certainly in our lifetime. And he's known as an American serial killer, bank robber, burglar, arsonist, kidnapper, and, let's top it up, sex offender.
He's a real multitasker.
This
A
guy,
good all-rounder.
he's busy. He's been very busy. He was born in Richmond, Utah on January 7, 1978. And rather importantly, he was the second of 10 children, and he was the eldest boy. So his parents, Heidi and Jeff Keys, were members at that time of the LDS Church. And the father had been a missionary in Germany. And I think that's why you'll find his name is Israel. There's not a Jewish connection. It is more a Christian connection. And apparently his older sister, I don't know any of the other names, but the older sister was called America and he was called Israel. And from what I can understand, the parents were incredibly poor and Mormons, and Utah, of course, being one of the hotbeds for Mormonism. They were very poor, and the parents were very anti-government. They didn't want anybody else involved in the raising of their children. They didn't want anything sort of projected onto them. They wanted to be able to keep their children's minds, I guess, and hearts to themselves. So unsurprisingly, the family were homeschooled. They didn't want any involvement. And one of the other things they didn't like, they also didn't approve of any modern medicine. So in their lifetime, these children had never been to a doctor, for instance, let alone, ever been prescribed any medication. So they must have been pretty hardy. If you've got 10 of them, that's, nothing to sort of quaff at, is it?
Well, imagine when a disease went through the family, like if nits went through and they didn't have any medicine for that. Like, I've got to comb 10 kids' heads to get all the nits out. Maybe they just shaved it off. Sorry.
Oh, no.
I digress.
By the time Israel was 5, his parents actually then decided they were going to reject Mormonism. And I guess unsurprisingly, they relocated. And they actually left Utah and they relocated to a place called Colville in Washington State. So not Washington, D.C., Washington State. And once they got there, I guess it's just sort of heading sort of further north in some respects, they continued to live an increasingly unorthodox life where they were actually living in a series of tents, I think, whilst their father and the eldest boys, including Israel, built by hand a one-room log cabin, which all 12 of them went to live in. So it's in the woods, certainly not in, a suburban area even. And in the Emma Kenny piece, she said that they had no electricity, no heating, and no running water. So sort of super off-grid. It was very extreme in the way they were exposed to and incredibly isolated. So when they started looking back at, Israel's exposure to other people, how he socialized, you get this sort of, I guess, mismatch where in one case you've got people saying, well, they didn't socialize with anybody at that point when he was very young. And on the other hand, they're saying, well, he did have 9 siblings and a mum and dad, and they were obviously all together all the time. So perhaps they were very social with one another. But I don't think that kind of upbringing looks incredibly challenging for anyone who lives a somewhat, modest Western lifestyle. That is a very hard lifestyle for anyone to live with no electricity and no running water even. You'd be pretty feral, wouldn't you? I don't see there'd be another option. So as I said, they'd rejected Mormonism when they were in Utah. They've moved to Washington State. And whilst they're in Colville, the family actually started attending services at a church there called The Ark.
Oh, goodness.
Which the Ark subscribed to a white supremacist Christian identity ideology.
The best kind, right?
Now, I had to look up this other thing
Jesus,
that I found.
Also being a Jew and an Arab, would have been really happy about white supremacism in his name.
Wouldn't he though?
So Keys himself later described the Ark as an Amish-like environment. And it was around this time that They also became friends with, there was another family there that must have also attended the church, and they were called the Kehoes, Kehoe. And I mentioned that because I haven't looked into it, but Chevy Kehoe, who was one of the boys, he was later convicted with a triple homicide in 1996. So there's some great learning going on. Child rearing, that's what I'm after.
Yeah, good parenting. Yeah, there's a lot of good lessons being taught with the Ark. Yeah.
Yes. And the parents seem to always be looking for the next thing. So that wasn't the last church, but they also attended another church in Colville. And this one I looked up because I was like, this is so crazy. And it was called the Christian Israel Covenant Church. And it taught something called British Israelism as a doctrine. Now, I had to look that up.
What is that?
The British nationalist, pseudo-archaeological, pseudo-historical and pseudo-religious belief that the people of Great Britain are genetically, racially and linguistically the direct descendants of the 10 lost tribes of ancient Israel. With roots in the 16th century British Israelism.
This sounds like Crusadist bullshit.
Yeah. Was inspired by several 19th century English writings.
Yeah.
So
there we go.
I think it is then basically used to support white supremacy. And the next thing it talks about, I didn't know what this word was, but I probably should, and I might not pronounce it incorrectly.
Miscegenation.
So miscegenate, how do you pronounce it?
Miscegenation. It's where a person has any ancestral line whatsoever of a person of colour.
Blood.
And if they marry a white person,
especially,
or have relations with, that's miscegenation.
Yeah. And that's what they thought it was abominable and deviant. So again, great, things to be hearing from your parents and the church I guess, the word, it's nearly, I find it sacrilegious to call it a church. I think it's wrong. And Keyes later said that it was quite militia-like. So if you think about these kids who are growing up in the woods, very much.
Where were they? They were in Washington State. Yeah. They're in the backwoods.
They really are. Yeah. So the children were forced to sleep in a tent, but while the cabin was being made, they had to hunt their own food. I think that's probably quite important.
Have you ever
Chop
seen
firewood?
It's a show that I got hooked on for a while there. Oh, it's about a family living in Alaska. Mm-hmm. And they live like this, allegedly, although
Northern
in reality,
Exposure or something. Was it?
No. This was like a documentary, but it follows this family called the Browns and Alaskan bush people. It's called, and it's really very silly because at the end of the day, you find out if you do a bit of research on them that one of them was in town boozing all the time, and they weren't really as cut off as the whole premise is that they're living in an Alaskan wilderness and they're building their own cabin and it's the trials and tribulations of the Brown family. But what I always found somewhat amusing is that they referred to where they had their cabin and the land they were on, which by the way they didn't own, as Browntown. Getting back to Browntown, I'm like, oh, I wouldn't call it that. Although they were not violent as far as I could tell, and they were not white supremacists, and they were not indoctrinated in any of this sort of malicious nastiness.
Yes. So what you end up seeing is with Israel Keyes is he ends up, he obviously has to hunt for food, but it also becomes a hobby for him. He really gets great enjoyment out of hunting anything with a heartbeat. It doesn't matter what it is, he wants it, and he, happy to, he can skin a deer, he can do whatever need be. But there was a quote from a girl who had gone to church with him at this point, and she said that, seeing him behave that way used to make her skin crawl even at that age. He was just so confident and so comfortable around hunting, killing, and then I think they called it dressing, and I don't know what that is, but I suspect that's what you call when you actually
it is. It's when you take you pull it apart, you take the meat out, you get the guts out, you skin it. That's dressing, usually dressing a deer. Yeah.
Yes, he was very good at that. He was tall. He was 6'2" by the time he was 14. He kind of just at this point starts to go on a bit of a rampage. He ends up sort of finding guns in people's houses. He has his own BB gun, just firing in the woods, started breaking into houses, all these sort of like entry-level crimes kind of thing. And even one of the kids that he was hanging out with and doing this kind of stuff, he watched him shoot animals, and this other kid even started becoming uncomfortable with him, so sort of removed himself from hanging out with Israel. He sold guns that he'd stolen to adults. It just sounds a little bit, frontier, a bit wild. And then it started to become an evident problem for not just Israel, but the people that were around him. So his parents had some friends staying with him, and in their presence, he tied a cat to a tree with a parachute cord
here we go.
and gored it with a
Oh my God.
.22 revolver. The cat then began circling the tree before crashing into it and vomiting. Keyes allegedly chuckled before knowing that the boy, who later informed his father, had vomited in response to the incident. So at this point, Keyes said that he had an epiphany where he said his behaviour, he started to recognise that perhaps other people weren't quite into what he was in. His mother also starts saying that, yes, well, perhaps there were some troubling signs.
Red flag, red flag.
Yeah.
But what she sees is
Abort.
interestingly, she doesn't mention that as this troublesome thing. For her, he starts listening to radio stations.
Oh, right,
because
okay.
that's out. So she thinks he's being exposed to sort of
It's nasty
Exterior.
external influences. It's not
so it's
because
correct.
he's a whack job. Yeah.
No. And there was a
Useful
quote that Keyes gave, something that Keyes had said to the FBI during one of his interrogations was, I've known since I was 14 that there were things that I thought were normal and okay that no one else seemed to think were normal and okay. So that's when I just started being a loner. People found out about some of the stuff I did, like my parents and parents of other kids who would hang out with me. They would find out about some of the stuff I did. And that's when I just thought, I'll start doing this stuff by myself exclusively.
Mm-hmm.
So he could recognise that his behaviour was undesirable to others. So he
I'll
was
just hide
smart enough to go, I'll just do this on my own, in my own time, in my own way. And it's not something that I'll be sharing with others. I'll just keep this for myself because I know that it brings me pleasure and joy and satisfaction. But clearly others, not so much.
I'm not going to stop it.
No, not going to stop it. I'm not concerned about it. I just won't share it with others. This is for me. By his teenage years, he'd become a skilled carpenter, which is not surprising given his background and, working and helping to build the wood cabin.
Building a house, yeah.
Yep. And he also worked for a Colville contractor from 1995 to 1997. So by all accounts, he's just sort of on the fringe of society in where they're living. But, he's able to do work. He's a little bit concerned that he's having lustful thoughts for his girlfriend. He actually makes notes about that and uses some Bible references, some quotes to sort of diarise how he's feeling. But
were they just normal sexual lustful
I think
thoughts?
So at that point, yes.
Maybe if he'd acted on them, he might not have needed to fulfill his desires elsewhere. Anyway.
The family relocate again, this time to Maine, where they moved to collect maple syrup. And they worked kind of alongside an Amish, I don't know how to say that. Amish, that's correct, Amish community. But again, at this point, the parents are still so religious that the kids are starting to watch movies and try and hang out with friends, and their parents are totally forbidden that. They don't have a musical instrument, and all that's the kids just start doing this stuff and hiding it. And it's at this point. Yeah.
Can't have a musical instrument. It's
the devil's work.
Yeah. Wow. So it's at this point that Keyes, as a teenager, like an older teenager, he declares, and to his parents, that he's an atheist. And I don't think that went down quite so well.
Like a cup of cold sick.
Exactly.
And he'd always really tried to please his parents. I think that even sharing these beliefs with him, that he was no longer, under their control essentially, was just not good enough. So they basically told him that he had to leave, that he was no longer their son, and they told the other kids that they were not allowed to interact with him because they said they had previously really looked up to Keyes.
Because he's an atheist.
Yeah. So they were not allowed to have any contact with him. It was blasphemy what he'd said, and they knew that the kids had looked up to him, so they said, right, you must never have any contact with him again.
I mean, your joy at killing things we're fine with, but gosh.
Yeah.
Atheism, you're a monster.
So I guess if you're an atheist, that wouldn't have been that problematic. But Keyes finds a way to make that problematic. And then he goes, you know what? What I am probably a little bit more interested in is Satanism. So he has a slight shift there. And it's at that point that he starts thinking about a fantasy of committing maybe a ritualistic murder. So,
But are you an atheist if you believe something? So he's
no,
just a
you're an
Satanist.
atheist if you believe nothing.
That's
No.
right.
So he wasn't an atheist, correct?
Oh, he's a liar.
He did one thing and then he pivoted, shall we say?
Okay, right.
Maybe that's just his way of escaping the religious side of things so he could take a deep dive into
Another religion.
Satanism.
Or just to reject everything that his parents ever said. Yeah.
Yeah. So where to from here? He's alienated from his parents, not really supposed to have contact with his siblings, certainly the younger ones. It does say young ones. I don't really know about the other ones, and the family does come in to play later, so it's not like he has nothing to do with them ever again. But at that point, certainly. And then in 1998, he joins the army, joins the United States US Army.
I mean, that's probably a good spot for him if he likes to kill people.
Well, it's funny you should say that. I don't think that there's a reason why he wouldn't be called a super soldier unless you're pretty good at it. So on July 9, 1998, he was relocated when he enlisted with the United States Army in the state of New York, where he served as a specialist in Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 5th Infantry, 25th Infantry Division. I presume that's 3 different ones.
That's
I don't
a lot,
really know.
isn't it? I hope so.
He passed a month-long preliminary course for United States Army Rangers training, and then he was stationed at Fort Texas and Fort Hood. He also spending time abroad even. He was stationed in the Sinai in Egypt, and he did befriend a number of soldiers. Some he told that he'd like to kill, and most of them said that he was actually an incredibly good soldier, very quiet, and used to drink a lot on the weekends. But in terms of being a soldier, he was
Not judging him for that.
really quite good. Now, one thing came up which I found really interesting. I found this article of a woman who has written a book about Israel Keyes is interviewed, and she found this crime and the crimes that he committed so interesting because she was one of those people who said that she didn't really know anything about it. And she said, I saw a small news article about his crimes in December, 2012. And she said, and it ends with a bombshell, and of course I'll get onto that. But she said the thing I found really interesting was the fact that it was very hard to get any information about Israel Keyes and very hard to get information, through the FBI as to sort of what had transpired. And one of the things she found really interesting was how can someone who has no birth certificate, no sort of backstory, because he had nothing from the way he'd grown up with, how was it that he had become so quickly taken in by the army? Like, how did he prove who he was? Because apparently he didn't have all these documents and didn't exist really, just kind of drifting and couldn't prove who he was through any sort of real documentation. And she said, I just found that really unsettling that someone could be taken into the army like that and all of a sudden superstar. It is. And I thought I would never have thought of that. But, that when she was pulling apart his story and when she got to this part of, when he joined the army, she was like, hang on, how does this all work? And apparently the FBI, this bit is very much glossed over, this time that he served. They don't really share that information. It's all kind of hidden. So there's not a lot to say, but it kind of is. And I went, I wonder what that's all about. Again, sort of what I was alluding to at the beginning, there's a number of questions and things that come up that it doesn't always fit in in sort of a linear fashion. We go, this happened and then that happened and this happened. There are periods of time where it feels like there's no detail and all of a sudden there's a lot of detail. It comes in and out of focus is probably a good way of looking at it. So while he was at Fort Lewis, he served on a mortar team. As I said, he was noted for having a quiet demeanour, he had a bit of a habit of keeping to himself, but he would get very drunk on weekends and quite often would consume an entire bottle of wild turkey to himself.
That's a lot.
He was arrested once during this time, but that was on a DUI, got a $350 fine. So he was, by all accounts, a model soldier. Like he wasn't raising any flags there. He liked hip-hop music. He was kind of just like everybody else, except he was probably a bit quieter, but there was nothing untoward about anything that he did that was noted when he was serving.
Until one day.
Is there any suggestion he was doing bad things while he was serving?
No, there is no suggestion of that. And he says that he didn't.
Okay.
So he was in the army from 98 to 2001, and then he was honourably discharged, and he relocated to, I think it's Nia Bay in Washington. Why did he go there? Well, he'd formed a relationship with a Native American girl online, and he actually moved to her reservation. So he actually lived on the Maker
res.
Reservation in a community near Bay, which is on the Olympic Peninsula. I don't know where that is, but anyway, it's in Washington State. So again, he's gone back to where he was from. Well, maybe not so much where he's from because he's from Utah, but they'd obviously spent a fair bit of time in Washington. So he must have felt quite comfortable in that kind of environment. And I also suspect, because remember, for someone who likes to hunt, probably very, very, well, I know he's very, very comfortable being in the woods and stuff. It would have been a similar situation where he could get himself into these sort of areas that are quite remote. So in 2001, he relocates to Washington, and he has a relationship. He lives with this Native American girlfriend that he had met online. He actually has a daughter with her. So he has a child. So that's early in the 2000s. In 2007, Keys starts a construction business up in Alaska. It's called Keys Construction, and if I understand it correctly, he leaves his partner, the Native American girl, and when he moves to Alaska, he's actually following another woman who's his girlfriend, and he takes his daughter with him.
Oh, as in consensually or steals?
Yes, I believe it's consensually, but I can't find any other information around that, because that felt kind of odd to me that she would go with her father and that he would be following another girlfriend.
Alaska.
But I don't know for any names. I don't have any information, and I'm sure that's for a reason, about the daughter, but also the mother of his child. I was unable to find that when I was looking through stuff. But I guess the upshot is that he's now in Alaska. And when he gets to Alaska, he's the perfect guy for up there. He is considered, super useful. He's a handyman. He's a contractor. He's also does some construction work. He's like everybody else up there in many respects. That's the kind of person that moves to Alaska. You're capable. You like the great outdoors. You do hunt. You do have, probably a certain politics. You might have certain religious beliefs. I don't know, but it would suit him up there. So he was really welcomed by the community, and the people that I had heard had been interviewed in the process about what he was like. He was just like everybody else. He was someone who really contributed to the community, and he would participate in community events.
Hiding in plain sight.
Mm-hmm. No one thought anything of him at all. And that's not to say at this point he had or hadn't done anything. We'll come on to that. But he was liked, and that's not to say I don't know if he had particularly meaningful or deep relationships, but he was involved, and he was present, and he was there. So where do we jump to next? That is the question. Because the thing with Israel Keys is, as he describes himself, I'm kind of two people. So there was a life that he was leading, and there was another life that was sort of an internal life and a fantasy life, and a life of someone who was very, very interested in serial killers and crime. And it was basically, as he said, it was a hobby for him. So what he had started to do over the years was probably a little bit like you, Schmitty. He'd become quite adept at understanding sort of
police protocol.
He became a fangirl for serial killers.
I am not a fangirl of serial killers.
Hello.
I am not.
Schmitty, have you ever written to one in jail?
No, I'm more of a fangirl of true crime podcasters than I am of actual serial killers. That's how I know about Israel Keys, is because I've heard other podcasts.
Well, I don't think I think this would be an annoyance to him, but he had loads of books and had done a lot of research, and Ted Bundy was his number one favorite guy. But what is so narcissistic about Israel, what he found was he was concerned because his knowledge of what these other serial killers had done, and in watching he was always trying to be the cleverer one.
Yeah.
Listening and learning and picking up all the different techniques and methods that people used, what the police were looking for. It was all about being smarter. And his biggest concern, which I think is a really narcissistic trait in this, is his concern was he didn't want to be seen as being a copycat. It was really important to him that he was his own kind of standalone serial killer. So whilst he really admired Ted Bundy in particular,
He didn't want to come across as just
no,
Yeah.
just copycat.
I'm
And
going
other
my
serial
own
killers
way.
frustrated him. So other people, he didn't like the way they'd done things, or
Maybe
they
he
confessed.
should have been a Dexter and just gone and knocked off other serial killers.
Serial killers, the ones that frustrated him for sure.
You were talking earlier about his hunting and his dressing an animal and all the rest
Yep.
of it. Do you remember at the
Yep.
start of Dexter that his, I think, father or stepfather notices that he's gets a lot of pleasure out of killing, and so he takes him and he tries to use hunting as a way to manage that desire in Dexter? You might not remember that. I do.
I've never watched it. However, it concerns me greatly that one of my children loves it, and they talked about it at school the other day, actually, and talk about a psycho move. All the kids were talking about it because it was in psychology.
Yeah.
The teacher apparently brought it up. They discussed it as a class, and she'd mentioned where she got to. And my child, who remained nameless, sat there through the whole class and went up to the teacher at the end and said to her, "Where are you up to?" Because I've seen the whole lot. And I went, "Oh my God, you're a total psycho." Dexter, yeah.
Oh, no, I mean, that's just a TV show. No, I thought you meant your kid really liked hunting. I was like, okay, it's time
Oh,
to
no,
get
no, no,
therapy.
no, 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 no.
Right,
Oh,
right,
no,
right.
plenty
no.
of
Oh, God, no,
kids
no, no.
like hunting.
Oh, no, but
Plenty
the
of
whole...
kids like shit TV shows too.
But is Dexter... I couldn't watch it. I imagine it'd be... Not, the irony of me doing this stuff is I'm scared of everything, you know that.
But yeah, but it's probably no worse than Freddy Krueger or something like that from when we were young, which we didn't watch either, but because we knew they were scary, but some
I couldn't
people
watch
did.
any of that, yeah.
Nah, me neither.
So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump. And I'm going to jump ahead to kind of the beginning of the end.
Ooh.
And yeah, I think it's because I'm trying to kind of reflect the fact that he is so under the radar. He's on nobody's radar. No one's looking for this guy. Nothing's happening. He's just living a life. And for all intent and purpose, we know that he's done nothing. But things change. And this book that I had spoken about before, which is called The Hunt for the Most Meticulous Serial Killer of the 21st Century.
Could do with a catchier title.
Yeah, it's a bit easy. It's written by Maureen Callahan. She starts her book at this point. She is his last known victim, which interestingly I'm introducing as the first today. Yes, correct. And being respectful, obviously, to the people
I think it's
came
pretty
before her.
normal for people to start at this point, though.
Yes. Okay. So let's start here. The young lady in question is Samantha Koenig, and she is in the town in Alaska where he lives, which, again, I've kind of got to give a bit of away, which is very unusual for him to do anything close to home. So it's a really tragic case. She was an 18-year-old girl, and she was a barista that was working in a coffee kiosk. And I think you'll have seen these on probably Northern Exposure. They have them sort of by the side of the road. They literally are like a little box that they sell coffee in. Have you seen them? No? Does it ring any
Not really,
bells?
but
It's a mini, like, it's not a drive-through, but it's just like basically
like
a
one of
box on the
those-
side of the road.
Like a container, a shipping container?
That kind of size, but I think they are normally built, but they're
making
small.
me think of those funny little caravans in lay-bys in England where they would make a
Morning, Neville. Double cheese.
yeah, a
Yes, but
bacon,
more like-
bacon egg roll and a coffee. Yeah, but
Oh,
no.
God. They're basically little shacks.
Okay, all right.
And, and they're largely staffed by young pretty girls. And I read that in the summer they used to have them dressed in bikinis.
Oh my goodness.
This came
no.
apparently after this. That didn't happen after this. But, I mean, that
They
was not
got
the case when...
one pieces after that.
It's just a bit not great. But she was working alone, so they are a tiny little coffee stand. It's not a shop. It's small. It operates the shop, but it's tiny. So you got
It's just one person. Yeah.
Yeah. And on the night of February 1st, 2012. So we've been up in Alaska for probably 5-6 years at this point. So he's been up there quite a while. She goes missing, and her family report her as missing the next morning. She's just disappeared. She doesn't come home to her boyfriend afterwards. Maureen goes on to say there was zero urgency on the part of the police department. They didn't even rope off the crime scene. Of quite frankly, they didn't really care. They think that this is a teenage girl who's come from a rough background, had a broken home, had a bit of a history with drugs, and they think she's just made off for the days take out straight out of the register, which is not a lot of money, maybe a couple of $100, and she's out partying. She'll come back when she feels like it.
Swanny, was there any reason to think that there was a crime scene?
Yes,
Yeah.
there would have been, but it wasn't taken seriously.
Yeah, okay.
Later, the FBI says that Keyes had Samantha from the time he took her, around 8 p.m., that he had walked all over Anchorage for 4 or 5 hours. They were seen 13 times. Keyes just didn't care because he was so used to the way the police department worked in Anchorage that he knew that there would be no urgency, and he was so right.
Sorry, they were walking around Anchorage for 4 hours?
Yeah. I don't know why they would have done that.
Oh,
I don't
okay.
know. But he did live in Anchorage. He did have a home there.
Mm.
When they finally got the surveillance video from inside that kiosk, they see a large man leaping into the kiosk like a cheetah. So what happens is you see her and she does this. So he's obviously got a gun or something because she does that to start with, and then he jumps in. And they still think he's an accomplice.
Oh,
What?
God's sake.
And they're in on it together. They somehow believe that the 18-year-old girl with very limited resources has concocted this elaborate criminal conspiracy to make off with $200 for drug money.
Fuck off.
Finally, about 2 weeks later, they
God.
get surveillance video that shows her trying to break away from him with her hands bound in front of her. And that's when they realise, oh, God, this is a
It's all
kidnapping.
too late 2 weeks later, you idiots. Oh.
Well, yes or no? Where's Keyes? What's he been doing? Well, Keyes has actually taken her back to his house, which is very, very unusual for him. He'd never done that before. And after killing her...
I know he's not a copycat, but do you know whether the various types of things that he's doing are any of them reminiscent of someone else's crime? So he doesn't want to have maybe the one MO to be a copycat, but is he influenced for this behaviour because he keeps saying it's quite different to what he normally does? Do you know or not?
Do you know what? With the hardest part about telling this story is this crime is not like anything else that he did any other time. But
it's not like some
yes
other
and
famous
no.
case either.
No, not at all. This is one of the things where I'm left with questions going, how was it? Because this is the one time that he wasn't meticulous. Okay,
maybe he just wanted to get caught by now.
I don't know. So he takes her back to his home where he's got like a back shed or something, and he sexually assaults her and he strangles her. That absolutely was his MO. He'd love to strangle people, and he'd love to watch the life about
drain
them.
out of them. Yeah.
Yep. And the fight, the struggle, he's all about control, always in control. He's a real control freak. So he murders her. Then he leaves and he flies to New Orleans, but he ends up going on a cruise for 2 weeks with his family. So that sort of is where I get confused, right? A, he's in touch. That's not to say that that's his parents. So I'm presuming like some siblings or whatever else. But they must all be, I don't know, somewhat normal and going on cruises and catching up for holidays,
They had
right?
a family thing organised. He just wanted to have a little bit of fun before he went on holiday.
So he leaves for 2 weeks. They're still fucking around in Anchorage because they've got, there's no crime to start with. Oh, actually, funny that you should say that. Now that we've actually been having a look at it, yes, it does look like a kidnapping. That girl's poor family were like beside themselves because they were like, this is not right. Something's not right. Something's not right. She hasn't done this, what you're saying, where is she? So he returns back from his trip. And this is awful. He gets her body and he sets it up to appear that she's still alive. And in doing that, he puts makeup on her. And I did read in one place that he stitched her eyes with fishing wire to look like they were open. And then he grabs the newspaper from that date, dated February 13, which was 12 days after the abduction from the coffee stand. And he takes a Polaroid photo and he has a ransom note demanding $30,000 from Koenig's family on the back of the photocopy of the photo. So he's tried to sort of dilute the image kind of thing. And he sent a text message to the woman's boyfriend on her cell phone with directions where he'd left the note at a local dog park. Keyes then dismembers Samantha Koenig's body and he disposes of her remains in a frozen lake north of Anchorage after he'd cut a hole in the ice with a chainsaw. And then
That's risky, isn't it?
he kind of goes on the run. Keyes, who at this point is 34, was arrested in March in Texas because he'd used Koning's stolen debit card at
Oh, for
ATMZ.
God's
He had never
sakes.
done that. He had never done that before.
Did he want
and I
to
don't
get
know why.
caught?
It doesn't say that he does. He doesn't say that he did. So I don't understand why he did this.
Yeah, right.
Because previously, he only ever used cash.
Yeah.
He always knew to turn his phone off. He was so meticulous with his preparation that this is where I
wonder
get
whether he was ready
thrown.
to get over it. He was like, I'm
Let's
done.
let them find. I don't know, because that's too obvious, right? The ATM
Yeah,
thing.
it is.
Oh, he'd used the card. He'd taken money out in Arizona and New Mexico. So he was moving around a lot. After he was arrested, Keyes confessed to killing Koning, and then when they've got it, I guess what it's called. Once he's been arrested, he's actually extradited. Can you be extradited if you're in the same country, taken back to Alaska? Are you allowed? Can that actually be a thing? Is that the right word?
Between states. I'm trying to think what we
Yeah.
do in Australia. It'd be something
Is
like
that
that.
extradited?
They have
I think it is,
extradition
actually.
treaties.
It is,
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so obviously whilst they're
They
doing this thing for
extradite
him-
people from one state to another all the time.
Okay, that is the correct word then. So when he's extradited, he's sent back to Alaska. Now, one of the things that I found, again, very interesting is it is not shared publicly at all. At no point did they tell the general public that they were looking for this man. The police did, but no one else did. And even when he went back to Alaska, it wasn't in the press. It was very much they were trying to keep this quiet, which I find really unusual, interesting. I don't know. Yeah.
They being the press or the FBI?
With the FBI keeping the press quiet, I think. I didn't think the press were even aware of what was going on,
Right.
that they had this guy. So it's during interviews with the FBI that all of this next information then comes to bear. And what happens is he's taken in, and the way they deal with him is I guess they do that thing where they, kind of create a friendship or relationship with the serial killer or the killer. They didn't know he was a serial killer at this point, to try and understand what they've done. And he's quite happy to share with them on the proviso that they do a couple of things for him. One of them, he wants a particular Starbucks Americano, I think it is, coffee. The other thing is wants a Snickers and a cigar. And if they provide him with that, I'll provide you with information. I don't know how many times that happens.
No KFC?
Early days, he's quite happy.
You're not yourself when you're hangry.
He's quite happy to sort of start telling them what he's done.
Yeah.
So overall,
Because I bet he's quite proud of it.
absolutely. So in generic terms, Keyes admits that he has targeted random people all across the United States to avoid detection. He plans the murders for months before he actually commits a particular crime. So when I say he's planning it, he's not planning who, he's planning how. So that is the one thing that has set him apart from pretty much most other serial killers, and certainly his idol Ted Bundy, is because they truly were random in when it would come to when it would happen, it would be who is available. So I think they talk about availability, vulnerability, and desirability. Apparently his wasn't really about desirability. So when they were talking about Ted Bundy and people, Ted Bundy apparently had a particular type of attractive woman. She had a haircut a certain way, certain look, whereas this guy didn't. None of it was connecting the dots for, I guess, law enforcement, because it didn't look the same, because the people look so different. He specifically frequented campgrounds and isolated locations. He claimed to only use guns when he had to and preferred strangulation. This was due to the pleasure he derived from witnessing victims lose consciousness in the struggle. He claimed, although this has been refuted by a number of different different people who are looking into the crimes, he claimed that he did not kill children or parents of children, primarily because he had a daughter of his own.
Oh, what a good guy.
Know, but that makes no sense, actually, because they're always someone's children, right?
Yeah. Is that accurate, though? Like, is there...
No.
I don't kill people under the age of 10.
And I will come on to this, but he never admitted to killing children, although they think that that's unlikely, and there are some that they think that they point towards him, but he didn't admit to them. So that's just something that he put out there. Yeah, as I said, sort of they were very skeptical. Keyes did not admit to any murders during his 3 years in the United States Army, but he did admit to attempting to rape a sex worker while on leave in Egypt and a college student he met while on leave in Israel.
I find it hard to believe he didn't kill anyone.
Yeah.
at that time.
Murder, anyway. He might have killed people on.
This is what I find. So there's no information on this.
murder,
Because imagine being the FBI listening to that. He goes on and he confesses to committing bank robberies in New York and Texas. So then they have to go and find these crimes and prove that he actually did them. Because what he was needing was he needed
that cash that he was spending.
Cash. Because the way he committed crimes cost a lot of money. He was forever traveling. I read something that were like 35 different
he just
trips.
Got on a flight to
New Orleans
and went to. I was like, what does he do for a living? This guy's cashed up.
Yeah. And that's it. This is the thing. He was constantly on the move. And when he was committing crimes, he'd land in one state, hire a car, and drive across sometimes 3 states to commit a crime in another state.
He really was
and he'd been planning this for
he?
years. He also told authorities that he had burglarized a Texas home before he set it on fire. And the FBI reports that they think he had burgled 20 to 30 homes across the United States, and perhaps robbed several banks between 2001 and 2012 when he was apprehended. Now, Keyes is believed to have begun killing in around 2001, which is when he was discharged from the army.
I was thinking, that seems quite young to kill. But then I'm like, I don't know when's young and when's old anymore, is it? When's the right time?
I think I'll just wait till I'm finished at the army. I'll do my service and then I'll start my career as a serial killer.
Yeah.
It seems to make sense. As I've sort of said a couple of times, unlike most serial killers, he did not have a victim profile, stating that he chose victims randomly. On his, and I do love this term because it's so true, he went on murder trips. It was like murder tourism. Think about it. He kept his mobile phone turned off. He paid for items in cash. And he just would land in one place and leave it. So there would be there'd be obviously proof that he'd landed there.
But nothing else.
Ticket over, and then he would disappear. But then what he would do is he would travel somewhere else. Sometimes he was planning maybe a year or two ahead, where he was going and he was planting these murder kits or a murder sort of cache of weapons, where he would go somewhere isolated and he would put everything that he was going to need and he would bury it, hide it, disguise it, whatever else, and then do nothing with it there and then off he'd go, he'd leave. So if he was ever caught in a car heading there, they couldn't connect him to it because it wasn't on him at the time. He had done all of that in it. He was ready to act when he returned. So it's all about this sort of methodical mid sort of to long-term planning about having access to what he'll need, the tools he'll need, his murder kits when he's ready to execute the murder. So he gets such joy and satisfaction and also sexual pleasure from being this methodical, I don't need to rush, I'm in no hurry, I enjoy the process, I enjoy this sort of, like nearly the
anticipation.
The patient, it builds, and this idea that this control over a period of time.
Patient.
Yes, but by planting a murder kit somewhere where people are walking past it, that thought gave him such a thrill. Yep. A real sicko, yeah. That in itself, could it be that person who's walking past now that I end up meeting when I go back? What I do find rather interesting, though, he had, when he was compared to Ted Bundy had a job where he travelled for work. Whereas this guy wasn't really travelling for work. That wasn't really the setup. So I do wonder how he would disappear and where he'd say he was off to, I don't know. I think I've read that was like 35 trips. He could be building something else. He did have a property in New York that he could say that he was going to. It was like a sort of a rundown house upstate New York.
Were they long trips or would he just duck in and out for the weekend kind of thing? Do you know?
Well, he was driving so much. So it must have been for a little bit of time.
Fucking hell, I'd be tired though. I can't do more than 2 hours of a drive without needing a nap.
Yeah, but your motivation's probably not the same thing. I think if you thought that there was some great thing happening and the big reward at the end, it might be different.
And you'd been planning it for years.
Yes.
True.
Or months.
Keyes told the agents during these, I guess we'll come on to the confessions where he starts talking about the victims, that he says, I learned from you guys. He had read Mindhunter when he was 14 and he watched CSI and he knew what to do and what not to leave behind. And it's interesting because he was so proud of his organisation and, he believed that he was so clever that in one interview they tell him that they were actually able to, after he tells them that the crime he commits, and we'll come on to that, they find a fingerprint on a bullet casing or something like that. And when they tell him that, yes, actually we were able to, that was one of the things we were able to find, and it, it has matched you, he was embarrassed and then became quite angry because he thought that he would be flawless in his preparation and that nothing would be there. There'd be no evidence left. So that really they said actually kind of changed his whole attitude toward before that he was so open and
You've got nothing on me.
Happy and laughing and, like just
because I'm so
open.
skillful.
Let me tell you what happened there. That kind of stuff. Yeah.
Oh, how embarrassing.
So that did not go
I did
down
what?
well.
Oh,
A shame.
So shall I share with you the victims that he did confess to? So this is after they've arrested him for the murder of Samantha Koenig, the abduction, murder and rape.
Yeah.
So whilst he's there, he confesses to murdering a couple, and they were actually from Essex, Vermont. They were 49-year-old Bill Courier and his 55-year-old, slightly older wife, Lorraine. And Keyes had flown to Chicago and then driven 1,000 miles to Vermont to kill. And we know that because he had one of his kill kits stashed there. He was ready to go. So that had been there for 2 years waiting.
Jesus.
So this was in June of 2011. So that had been there since 2009. And when he gets there, he books a room in a hotel and then he's ready. And he heads out and he's just looking for an opportunity, as he often does. It's right place, wrong time, whatever, wrong place, wrong time. And he comes upon a house and he can see that there's no evidence that there are children in this house. He sort of saw a barbecue set up that looked like it was sort of for old people. There was a car that was parked. It looked like there was somebody home, but it just looked like maybe something for middle-aged people. So he broke into the Courier home on the night of June 8. And at that point, he tied up Bill and Lorraine and gets them on their stomach and gets them tied up behind their back and tells them, tell me where the safe is, tell me what your key card numbers are, all that kind of jazz. And they think at this point perhaps that he's just going to rob them. They're sort of certainly hopeful of that. They're saying, look, we really don't have any money. We'll give you everything we've got. You can have everything and we won't tell anyone. Like they're pleading with him, trying to strike a bargain so that's the worst that happens. And when he's recounting the story, he's saying that what he really enjoys is the fact that they kind of thought that was going to be the end of it. But, of course, he knew better.
Prick.
So, again, when he talks about these crimes with the people that are interrogating him, that's the kind of, the emotional reaction that he's having at all the different points during the crime, where he's saying this satisfaction that he gets from being in control and then sometimes, allowing them to think that they might get out of this alive, knowing that that's never going to happen. And that control and, how he would take their emotions up to giving them some hope, then taking it away, and then he would take them on this sort of journey. Correct.
Like the way he tortured that poor cat.
Yes. So the murder kit was hidden near the Courier's home 2 years before. He had never, put eyes on them before. They were irrelevant.
It wasn't about them. They're just whoever he got on the day. Yeah.
Available.
He then actually
which frankly is really terrifying.
He took them away from the house. He took them to, I think it was called a barn. I'd heard this was on the Organised Killer YouTube piece that I saw.
Yep.
And she said that he'd seen there was a for sale sign like on an old barn somewhere. So he took them to the barn. And at one point she tried to escape while he was dealing with the husband. Anyway, long story short, the husband really, really fought back. He was fighting back so much. He kind of got out of some kind of, maybe broke the chair that he was sitting on, was able to get up and kind of tried to come for Israel. And at that point, Israel said, I didn't like that because it was not the way it was supposed to be, because everything's planned. So where he gets frustrated sometimes, and he's normally very cool, he sometimes starts to lose his cool bit if things are not going to his plan. And it was at that point that he ended up hitting Bill over the head with a shovel, I think. But then Bill sort of comes again, like, because he's running on pure adrenaline, cortisol, trying to save his wife, who we can hear screaming. And at that point, he shoots him like several times in the chest and limbs. And then he goes and rapes Lorraine twice before taking her downstairs, where he then strangles her in front of the last thing she sees is her dead husband in a pool of blood. Oh, shut up.
Jesus.
Yeah.
That's
Isn't that
awful, isn't
disgusting?
it? Yeah. Like, that's torturous.
Yeah, really. And sort of that
That's what it's
dragging it
all
all
about.
out and taking them up and down, giving them hope. That's what he, always used to smile. Like, oh, they had hope. He liked to give them a bit of hope and think they might get out of this. He also confirmed that he had, of course, abducted Samantha Koning from the coffee booth. And he did take her debit card and other property, sexually assaulted her, and he killed her the next day by strangling him. He left her body in that shed, which he'd said, and then he went to New Orleans, where he departed on that pre-booked 2-week cruise with his family to the Gulf of Mexico.
Lovely.
He returned. Her body was still in the shed because no one knew if they were looking for her or not. Some people were, but the police weren't. They were just sort of waking
When
up to
was
the fact
this?
that this was in 2012,
No, but about what time of year?
February. She was
So
abducted
she's
on the 1st of
frozen.
Feb. Well,
She's
yes.
probably pretty frozen.
Yeah. The fact that he took that picture of her body, oh my God, pretending that she was alive is just so sick. And it was the money that I think I did hear somewhere or read somewhere that the father, they had put some money into her account. That's the money he really was taking out, which doesn't seem meticulous or careful or organised at all. Do you know what I mean? The fact that this ransom money, he then starts using it.
No, that's what I'm saying. I feel
too
like there's
obvious.
something in the way he's doing this that suggests that he wanted to get caught by this time.
Yeah, they don't say
Whether
that,
it's
but I can't
conscious
imagine
or
why.
otherwise, I
Yes.
really feel like, yeah.
And her body, her remains were recovered by the FBI's underwater search and evidence response team. So possible victims, and this is where he hints at murders, whereas other ones it's a little bit like where they find out where they're trying to work out where he was at different points during those years where he was traveling so much because they can't always connect the dots. So why would I be telling you about possible victims if they could continue on to actually ask him? And he was always so happy to share that information. And that's because he kind of got to a point where he'd had enough. He told them that he needed to be assured that he would be put on death row, and it had to happen within a year. He needed to remain in control of the narrative that was, this is what's going to happen to me. And so they used that as a sort of like, yes, we will go to, I don't know who it is, the judge, the court, whatever it is, and we will say that that's what you want if you continue to give us information. But we need more information to work out what other crimes you've committed, because they weren't aware of any of it. And then he just started sort of spilling all this information. So they're trying to get more and more information out of him, thinking, how much time have we got? What's going to happen? We're going to have to, because sometimes he would refuse to speak and sometimes he'd be quite open to it.
It's all part of his control act, isn't it?
And I think what happened was initially he was very happy to share, but I think as time started getting on, so he'd gone into probably around March, I think, of 2012, he arrived or would have been incarcerated. Because remember, he killed her, he travelled a bit, come back. So if you said, February, March, you'd be correct. And then the months start going by. So we're talking about, all the way through to later in the part of the year, he starts to become less helpful. Yeah. And he's kind of talked about other possible victims. They're sort of saying, well, what about this person? What about that person? He's confessing bits and pieces. Other bits where they really think that he will have been involved, he's saying, no, I wouldn't do that. So it's becoming less easy to deal with him. And so whilst he's being held in this jail in the Anchorage Correctional Complex, Israel Keyes manages to conceal a razor blade in his cell. It is uncertain how Keyes obtained the blade, as he was under security restrictions and he was on suicide watch. So he was using an electric razor under supervision. He died by suicide on December 2, 2012 by cutting his wrists and attempted strangulation with the bed linen. A suicide note found under his body consisted of an ode to murder. It had so much blood on it from him cutting his wrists that the FBI still can't read all of it. They can read lots of it, but not all of it from the blood that was soaked into it. It offered no clues about other possible victims. In 2020, 8 years later, the FBI released the drawings of 11 skulls and 1 pentagram that had been drawn in blood and were found underneath Keyes' bed after his suicide. One of the drawings included the phrase, "We are one," written at the bottom. The FBI believes the number of skulls correlates with the total number of his victims. So, who could these other possible victims be? These are the people that they have identified or had identified. And I think it's just such an ongoing thing because they're always trying to work out if they can tie back other missing people in different situations that have happened. One of the things that we've talked about a lot is people who are living on the fringes, not necessarily being noticed. We often talk about sex workers. We do know that Israel Keys visited prostitutes often, particularly when he was on his murder tours. There are questions over how many people like that could have actually been his victims. It wasn't necessarily something that happened, but they think there's probably a number that would, people have just, fallen through the cracks. This is interesting. So Deborah Feldman was a 48-year-old woman, and Deborah had, she was on pretty hard times, and she ended up with I don't know if it was meth, but she was a drug addict of some description. And as a result, her family and her own husband and child disowned her, and they think that she had turned to sex work to pay for her drug habit. And she was last seen at her apartment in New Jersey in 2009. Her body has never been recovered. And federal agents showed Feldman's image to Keys, upon which he hesitated. He waited and then said only, "I don't want to talk about her yet."
Right.
It is suspected that Keys buried her near Tupper Lake, New York. So that was one person. Julie Marie Harris was a 13-year-old Special Olympics medalist in skiing. She'd actually had
children.
This is where they found this one quite interesting. Yeah. She disappeared on March 2, 1996, while waiting for a ride to a local church in Colville, Washington. Remember, that's where they actually lived.
Yep.
Her remains were found on April 26, 1997, in a wooded area a few miles away. A cause of death was not determined. Harris was a double amputee. Her prosthetic feet were found by the Colville River a month after her disappearance. Keys, then 18, lived in the area at the time and was questioned about her case after he was arrested. But he neither confirmed or denied it, and they wondered if A, he didn't do it, or B, he wasn't comfortable with saying he did do it because of her disability and because she was a child, 13-year-old.
I don't think he gave a shit about her disability, but I reckon that after he had a kid of his own, he may have actually been ashamed for killing a child. Yeah, didn't want to acknowledge it.
Cassie Emerson, 12, another young girl from Colville area, Washington, was reported missing after the remains of her mother, Marlene K. Emerson, 29, were discovered in their burned-out trailer home on June 27, 1997. Cassie's remains were found in 1998, about 13 miles from home. Keys did admit his first act of arson was with a trailer in Colville. So there's something there. Mm-hmm. Yep. He admitted to investigators he had killed 5 people in Washington state and was a subject of an active investigation by the state police and the FBI. Keys claimed to have either buried or submerged a victim in a lake in Knee Bay. That was when he was living on the Native Reserve between July and 2001. And what they've said is these areas that he frequented, particularly in Washington, when he'd lived not too far from this lake that is like, I don't know, a kilometre deep. If you want to get rid of a body, you just take it there. So great hunting ground, great place to get rid of a body.
And I always think Ilden's pretty good for that too.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, I reckon.
It's very deep. Yeah.
I find that terrifying. I read a Sidney Sheldon novel when I was at high school, and I was obsessed with all those sort of, I guess what, murder mystery crimes, whatever else. I used to love reading them. And one of them, someone got rid of a body in a lake in Greece that was bottomless, and it really terrified me. It's so funny that was the one thing I remembered. I'd never given thought to a bottomless, the idea of a lake that was so deep. And once I'd heard that and they talked about how dark it was, I was like, oh my God, I'm scared of dark water, but let alone dark, deep water is like, oh, that's a no-no for me. Terrified.
So apparently Ilden's 79 metres deep at its greatest.
That's a lot, isn't it?
He also had confessed to at least one murder in New York State in late 2012 when he committed suicide. Authorities had yet to be able to determine the identity, age or sex of the victim, so that's troubling. There was another situation in Texas where Jimmy Lamar Tildwell Jr., electrician, disappeared. He was last seen 5:30 a.m. He'd finished working the night shift during a bank robbery in Azul, Texas. The culprit, believed to be Keys, wore a white hard hat similar to Tidwell's. Tidwell's hair was also resembled a dark-haired wig worn by Keys during the robbery. When interrogated, Keys said that his wig was, in fact, human hair.
Oh!
When asked where he obtained the hair, Keys said, "You don't have to buy real hair to get real hair."
Oh, my God. No.
A search of Key's residence found dozens of books about murders, both fiction and non-fiction. Keyes reread Dean Koontz's 1995 thriller Intensity on several occasions and closely identified with the serial killer antagonist. He closely studied Mindhunter inside the FBI's elite serial criminal unit by FBI profiler Johnny Douglas in his youth. He undertook a meticulous study of other serial killers, idolised Ted Bundy, and shared many similarities with him.
So he did, let's face it, the Cert 2 through to the advanced diploma of serial killing.
For sure.
I think you're right. He also admired and studied other serial killers, yet actively shunned media attention for his crimes. This is so interesting, as he was fearful for his family and, I think possibly more important, being labelled a copycat. So remember what I told you, when he was being held to start with and they hadn't released any information about him publicly, part of that was to do with him. He was saying,
was that like a plea deal?
I
don't
want my daughter to find out about me.
Yeah.
So I will tell you, I need to keep it out of the press.
Keep it out.
Yeah. Which I just think is interesting. And remember BTK, is that what it was? BTK?
Yeah, BTK was one
Dennis
of those
Rader.
loudmouths.
Yeah.
He was so desperate for people to know who he was. Remember he sent them and they said, tell us this, and he goes, oh, if I leave the floppy disk or something, you won't be able to trace me. Is that right? And they're like, yeah, sure, that's right.
Yeah, dumbass.
And of course, then they worked out, I can't remember, it was a floppy disk or a CD-ROM or something, but they worked out it was the metadata was from the church or something, and so they tracked him. But yeah, he was sending things to the press. So did Zodiac Killer. Son of Sam, I think, did the same.
He was saying that he was so good at what he did that he was murdering people, and then there was nothing nothing. There was no, like, he'd be looking on the news, seeing what was being reported, and he'd be like, "Oh,
they're
God,
just missing.
I've got to know with another one. I've got to with another one." Imagine being interviewed like that.
That's why I think it's way more than 11.
Yes, but that was what was interesting about the one with, I don't know if it was Samantha. I can't remember. There was one that he did say he said he had seen something. Maybe it was the couple. Maybe he'd seen an article about that. There had been some information. Yeah, he just sort of said he saw that every single serial killer that's ever been written about, it's kind of a hobby of mine. Really interested. I think that might be it, people. Without going into
probably enough. I mean,
I think that's kind of enough. Because what happens is you end up with this situation where in midst of, several months of being interrogated, you end up with these sort of leads. It could be that person. It may be that person. We've worked out that actually at that time he was here. So I imagine there's a raft of other things that are being investigated and have continued to be over the years. But it was just so, what I found really interesting about him was not really his upbringing. I think, we've been there before, haven't we? But I found it interesting that it was so random.
He's a born psychopath.
Yes.
The fact that he gets to 14 and says, I know that I'm different.
Yes.
And I'm just going to hide that.
Yeah, it's not one where he was treated badly as a child, was it?
Not particularly. No more than any of his siblings who we don't believe has got onto the serial killers.
And I don't think that there's no suggestion that he mistreated the people that he was with or around. He would just live a life that was fairly normal, and then he would go and act out, and he would do that for himself. Yep.
Dennis Rader, BTK, was the same. He had a wife and kids and never mistreated them. He was a model citizen of the church, remember?
Yep.
Okay.
So that's it. That is Israel Keyes, the serial killer you may never have heard of. Born in 1978, lived to the age of 34 when he committed suicide. There are 3 confirmed victims.
Murders, yeah.
Yep. And they think that there's at least 11.
11, yeah.
But could be so many more. And I've heard him speak, and I've seen what he looked like, and there's just nothing remarkable, and there's nothing really monster. There's nothing, you don't get it. He's one of those people in plain sight, as you said, Schmitty, in plain sight. Yeah. They're amongst us. They're around us.
Oh, yeah, all the time. There are more psychopaths than you realise. They're just not all going to go commit terrible murders. There is a serialised podcast on this topic.
Yes.
Josh Hallmark, I think his name is.
Yeah.
And he has a podcast that I think is called something like True Crime Bullshit, True Crime BS or something, which is apparently something that Israel Keys said.
Oh, yes, that's correct. I did
Yeah.
see that somewhere, which was like, this whole, he didn't really like people,
Being
investigating
big on
true
like us.
crime.
Yeah.
Yes, because I think
Yeah.
it trivialized it too much for him.
Yeah,
It was sort of like,
So-
everybody thinks it just becomes a cultural phenomenon of people interested in true crimes. Like, that wasn't what he was after.
He's quite right. It has. That podcast I'm talking about, I haven't actually listened to it, but I believe that Josh is trying to find out further information for the purpose of, I suppose, providing closure and identifying other victims, and even like investigating further whether or not there are kill kits that are being found and that sort of stuff, because this guy left them everywhere. They're still out there, some of these.
Yeah. There was the article, the CBS News article, there was a thing done not that long ago. I couldn't watch it in this country, but I think it would have been really interesting. It was kind of like a follow-up, and a lot of it, they had found a number of the kill kits where he said they found, and they have found some, and they were really thorough. And, there's so much more to this story that probably another 5 years you could probably tell the story again, and there'd be so much more information
and there'll be more to it.
Different things they've been able to sort of connect to him. But, yeah.
Any thoughts for sentences? Obviously, he's taken, again, as a massive control freak, he's taken that out of other people's hands. But what do you think would be an appropriate sentence were he still alive?
I think he would need to be made a fool of. I think that'd be a good starting point. I think he would need to have something happen where his daughter was acutely aware of how heinous he'd been. I think that it would have to be something where he lost control of a situation. Definitely publicly would be good. What were you thinking, Schmitty? Clarkie, anything in mind?
I think I would stretch him out on I can't remember what they're called, but there's a particular device that they create, that they use for dressing deer. Is it a deer stall or something? Anyway, there's some expression for it.
No idea.
But maybe we'll stretch him out on one of those, naked, for the public to see. I think I might use some fishing wire, though, to sew his mouth shut, because he likes to talk about what he's done and how clever he is. And I'm pretty
he should just shut his mouth
by the desecration of people's bodies that he carried on with. So I will desecrate him a little bit while he's alive. And he just shut his mouth and he just sits there and he can't do anything to anyone and everyone just laughs at him.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm going to send him down to the bottom of Lake Eildon with an oxygen tube that he can't remove. So he's going to be all by himself in the dark, 79 metres underwater, and
He won't be by himself.
can breathe.
He'll be with those massive Murray cods down there.
Yeah. But I want him to be terrified and alone. So,
well, he will be if he sees one of those cod, I can tell you.
And he's not
How
going
big are
to
they?
be able to. Oh, they can be like over a
Oh
metre.
my God.
Yeah.
Really?
They're massive.
Yeah. So I want him to be all alone and terrified, not able to rally support or try to use his, probably what he thinks is his incredible intellect or something to get his way out of it. I just want him to be there all alone, terrified, with no one listening. So he's got an unremarkable death all by himself, but he's terrified.
Well, I'm pretty sure he's burning in hell right now. And on that happy note,
I just thought of one last thing. No, not really important, but it speaks to what you just said then. When in the letter, in the ode to murder, that in his suicide letter, there was part of it which was sort of really nonsensical. There was bits that were not made a great deal of sense. But there was one bit, and it was about the fact that when I've murdered you, or when you're murdered, you're just meat and bone. You're not, and your soul's gone as well. You're not going anywhere. Don't think you're dead. I've killed you. I've snuffed you out. There's nothing's going to happen nicely afterwards. You're not going to heaven. You're not doing anything. There was just this bit, it was so dark, so that, imagine being one of the awful victims' families hearing about that. Yeah, so that was what he believed, that it was like they're not off together going to meet one another in heaven. This couple that I've murdered, I've just extinguished your soul. This is the end. There's no more. You will be meat and bone now. I've killed you and your soul.
Well, I'm going to add to my sentence then that from the depths of hell where he burns now, he gets a little spyglass on occasion and he can look up in heaven and he can see his victims actually having a lovely time up there and looking down and flipping him the bird and saying, fuck you, Israel, you're a prick. There we go.
Absolutely. That feels like a fitting ending to that.
Mm.
Yes, so there you go. On that note,
As you say, every week, miss you already.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Trial by Wine. You can contact us at trialbywine@gmail.com. Please rate, review and subscribe to Trial by Wine on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to support us, you can become a patron at www.patreon.com, Trial by Wine, or visit our website www.trialbywine.com to donate to us. Your support will help us cover many more cases and apply wacky sentences. We really appreciate you listening and hope you tell everyone about us. Our cover art is by John Christo and music is by Beauchamp from pixabay.com.